Hello and welcome to Suzi's Book Bag, hosted by me, Suzifeay. I have got a children's book bag. Puffin, as you probably know, are a very famous children's publisher, but they don't publish the excellent children's novel we are going to talk about for the next hour or so. But it does feature puffins. There's puffins and all sorts of bird life in the book we are going to discuss. I am going to find out from its amazing author, Liz Hyder, whether she is truly obsessed with birds. Hello, I shall invite you into my book bag, Liz. Hello.
Hi.
Did it have to have puffins? I sense that you're keen on puffins.
Do you know what? I do love a puffin. I am a bit of a bird nerd. I think I'm kind of coming out now as a bird nerd in my 40s. I think people who know me well know I'm a bit of a nature geek, but yeah, birding is. I do love my birds. Puffins are just so cute. I mean, I've only really ever seen them at a distance, to be honest. So they're even smaller and cuter. But I do love a puffin. Who doesn't love a puffin?
They're adorable. We are talking about, I should say, your book, The 12. It's just come out. It is your second YA novel. So fourth novel altogether, two for kids, two for adults. And when I did a little event with you up in Shropshire, you were talking about this book. It hadn't come out and, you know, creating a great deal of excitement because The 12, I shall show you the cover again, it's a mystical tale of doings in Wales. But before we get into that, I wanted to ask you something about the way that you write, like how you write, you know, the Hyder way. See what I did there? You know, handwritten, ancient typewriter, only do it at 6 in the morning. What is your writing style like?
Mine is one I wouldn't recommend to most people. I mean, I take a lot of notes. I say I always have a notepad with me. Sometimes I have two where I've forgotten, I've lost one, and it's actually in my rucksack. So I take a lot of notes, and then I plot things out, and then I think about it endlessly, basically, and until I start writing it. And then when I write it, I sort of splurge, binge write it, and I normally write it in about first draft between 4 to 6 weeks, and that's for kind of a young adult or an adult book. And then I'm tired.
Yeah.
I wouldn't recommend
it. Do you sort of put it away then and sort of let it sort of settle before you go back to it, or do you immediately start on editing?
I put it away for a bit, but when I'm binge writing, what I do is, so I'm lucky enough that I kind of can carve out a bit of time to do it properly in the way that I would want to do it. And so in the morning, I kind of reread the last 5 to 10,000 words, and I edit as I go, and I tweak it and I polish it as I go, and then I write. My aim is to write 3,000 words a day, and sometimes it's more than that, and sometimes it's less than that. I'm not allowed to write more than 5 because I did that. I wrote 8 once, and luckily
you just go.
Yeah, it's just like don't do that again. It's just not. And sometimes it's a lot less. Sometimes it's like 1,500 words, but generally 3,000 is what I aim for. So by the time I finish that first draft, I've reread all of it quite a lot of times. So I kind of have a more polished first draft than I think maybe other kind of writers do. But yeah, it's knackering. And my husband makes me take weekends off, which is annoying because when I'm in the sort of zone with it, I just want to keep going, but it does mean I'm kind of not collapsed at the end of it. Semi-collapsed.
And so when you're in this kind of real focused, getting the story down mode, does that mean you begin at the beginning and go through to the end?
Yeah, I write chronologically. I know lots of people kind of write their favourite scenes or scenes that they kind of come to them, but I do it chronologically. And I sort of see it as like sort of a film in my head, but also like in my heart. I know that sounds a bit mad, but I have to be able to kind of feel it. So walking is kind of a key part of my process as well, that when I'm walking, I'm imagining the dialogue, I'm imagining how that scene looks and feels, what those characters are going through, and then I'll kind of sort of type it up really. So I've already written it in my head, and then it's a case of actually typing it up, writing it down properly.
Right. So talk us through the setting. I mean, it's interesting that you say that you write while walking. There is a lot of walking in the 12, and it is a particular area of, I believe, Wales. Is that correct?
Yeah, it's Pembrokeshire. So yeah, it's set in 1999, so just sort of on the cusp of a new century, but also a new millennium. And it's winter solstice, so I wanted it to kind of be that sort of wild Welsh sort of wintry weather. And it tells the story of Kit, who's 15, who's sort of gone on holiday there to a caravan with her mum and her younger sister Libby. And on winter solstice night, her younger sister Libby goes missing, and she doesn't just sort of disappear; she vanishes from existence. It's like she's been blinked out, basically. And Kit is the only person who remembers her, not even their own mother remembers her. But then she discovers that there's a local boy who also remembers her sister, and so the two of them must kind of team up and to try and find out what's happened and where Libby is and sort of rescue her, but also mend a rift in time that's kind of been opened as well. And in order to do so, they have to find out what the 12 are. So that's sort of the mystery that they need to kind of unlock. So yeah, that's why it's called the 12.
Yes, yeah. And one of the things that often happens in YA children's literature, you have to get rid of the adults in some way. You know, the young protagonists have to figure stuff out for themselves. And it's kind of funny, like the mum's sort of conked out in the caravan. she's just asleep. I thought that was quite funny.
Yeah, no, she's taken a sleeping pill, and because she's busy, she's a single mum, she's busy, she works very hard, and she's freelance, so that kind of comes with extra pressures. And so in order to kind of just sort of take the edge off and help her sleep, she's been taking sleeping pills. But Libby, the younger character, knows this, but Kit hasn't realised. And so I quite like that thing of how siblings know different things about their parents. I think that's quite a kind of interesting thing to play with as well, like kind of who knows the parent better, you know, which the answer is, well, you all do, but none of you do, but you all know different things, really. So I wanted to kind of play with that. But yeah, poor old mum, she's asleep when Libby disappears.
I mean, it has to be said, a lot of the adventuring takes place at night or early in the morning or in the evening. So she's not sort of just a narcoleptic lying in a caravan.
She's not asleep the whole time. I did have a narcoleptic science teacher, actually, Dr. Krista Dooley, who would fall asleep whilst teaching us science at secondary school.
Wow.
Yeah, that's when I realised what narcolepsy was.
So it wasn't just the effect you collectively had on the teacher, I'm sure.
There was a whole group of us in that class. It wasn't just me.
Because you never know. So, yeah, is it, just to go back to the setting, because it's sort of cliff top, there's peril, there is a stone circle. How much of that is made up? Because it's all near Tenby. Well, yeah. What's the name of the little place beginning with M? Because I don't know how to pronounce that. Manorbier. Yeah. It is Manorbier. Yeah.
I always thought it was Manorbier, but then I always thought it was Manorbier, and then I was corrected by people who came from there, people who lived there, and also from other Welsh friends who were like, no, it's Manorbier. Right. So yeah, it's not Manorbier. Yeah. I've been pronouncing it wrong for years.
Yeah, me too.
Yeah, it's just a little bit along the coast from Tenby. I love Tenby. It's so beautiful, like the kind of candy coloured, sort of huge big terraces teetering above the kind of cliffs above. And it's got 3 beaches, I think. Or someone said it had 4, and I was like, well, I've not discovered the 4th one. That's just showing off, isn't it, for the small town? But it is beautiful, that whole stretch of Pembrokeshire. The coastline is really stunning. It's very craggy. And it's quite similar to kind of Cornwall, I think, in terms of the sort of geography. But yeah, I went for a walk basically from Tenby along the coast to Manorbier, and then Manorbier just had such an odd atmosphere. Just as we walked into it, it's really tiny. It's a really, really small village, and I couldn't quite make it out. It's one of those places I still can't quite make it out. But the castle is sort of not quite where you think it would be. And it's not like Harlech, where it's kind of, you can see that, it's been silted up and that would have been right by the sea. It's sort of not quite in the right place. And then there's sort of a cromlech, like an ancient Neolithic tomb that's out on the headland, but it's not at the top of the headland, it's like halfway up. And then there's the church, and the church is old, but it has a white tower, and the rest of the church isn't white. It's just got this weird white tower, and it just looms over you, and it does look like it's been crying. It's got these kind of black windows very high up, and it's sort of smeared like mascara after tears, and I couldn't get it out of my head. I just thought I thought the church looked really creepy, really like kind of folk horror creepy. So I went back to try and find out what I knew there was a story there. It was like a tuning fork, that kind of hum in the air. So I knew I wanted to go back and try and find out what that story was. So that's kind of where it came from, and that's why it's sort of set there, really. But the stone circle I've made up. There is a place just outside of Manorbier called Scrinkle, which is based on, or kind of the Old Norse, as I'm sure we all know. Scrinkle.
I thought you made that up.
I just thought I had got it into my head that there was a stone circle at Manorbier, and so I must have made it up. But then when I discovered that Scrinkle actually does mean circle, and it's just outside Manorbier, I did think, circle, it could just be in a roundhouse. Do you know what I mean? But I like the idea of that kind of coincidence. So I thought, well, I know in Shropshire that we've had stones from standing stones that have been built into walls and into houses and stuff up kind of further north in Shropshire. So I like the idea of that sort of stone circle being incorporated into the church, and how religions kind of build on the same, a religion comes along and it builds on the site that was there before. So it's kind of, it's using those ancient sites of kind of worship or that are important, and sort of reusing them. So I wanted to kind of build on those sort of layers of history, I suppose, as well. Yeah.
I obviously don't want to give too much away. It's a thrilling adventure, but I think we can say that Kit pursues Libby into the past. She's kind of time slipped away, it turns out, and today's reality, or the reality of 1999, has just erased her. So in order to get her sister back and restore everything to the way it was before, Kit has to pursue her, and it turns out, she's been sucked into the past. Tell us about, of the trio of characters. We haven't talked about the boy, so let's bring him in.
Yeah, Story. So he's a bit older than Kit. He's 16, and he's named himself after Story Musgrave, who is genuinely fascinating, who is the most educated person ever to go into space. I think it's either 7 or 8 degrees. I can never remember. He's ridiculous. He's an absolute polymath, and he's cheeky and funny, and his middle name really is Story, and that's what everyone calls him. And I came across him on a documentary once, and I just thought, his real name can't be Story. So I Googled him, and then I just slightly fell in love with him. So I stole his name. And so my Story, who has named himself after Story Musgrave, is sort of living on his own in this sort of caravan site, and his mum's kind of left him there, and he's in some ways a sort of a bit of a tragic figure, but he's also got a real, core strength to him. He's got a very strong sense of his own identity, and he's slightly inspired by someone I used to know whose mum did walk out on a single mum. She walked out on him when he was 15, and he did have to learn how to do everything, like didn't know how the washing machine worked, didn't know how to look after himself. And I just always thought it was he was one of the nicest people I've ever met in my life, and I wanted to kind of use that. Story he's really smart, and you feel like he's someone who's kind of fallen through the gaps a bit of society. And I wanted to kind of write a bit about that as well. Those kids that kind of get forgotten about, who are academic, but the school system doesn't necessarily suit them, really.
Sorry.
I'm very fond of Story.
I think readers will be fond of Story. And his name does become significant, and I'm going to say no more than that. But, it's incredible how the story develops as it goes on. Now, I read a lot of YA. I mean this in the best possible way and the most positive way, but this is sort of, to me, old-fashioned storytelling. You know, you've got things like, you know, the mum who's stressed, who has to have sleeping pills. You've got the boy who's a bit of an outcast. But it's sort of, you know, old-fashioned magic, and a little touch of romance. I often find that a lot of YA, it's so depressing. It's quite gritty. It's sort of everything has to be sort of miserable and like real life, and it's got to be relatable. And, you know, I love sort of magic and enchantment. Do you kind of, when you're writing YA, would you ever sort of research the market, or do you just think this is the book I want to write and I couldn't care less?
The latter. I mean, I do read a lot of YA. I read a lot of YA. I read a lot of what we now call middle grade, which is like 8 to 12. I hate that. It's so American. We don't have middle grade over here. It doesn't make sense. Anyway, I read a lot of children's books. No, this is the story that I wanted to tell, and it's the book. It's the book I wanted to write, and I've been able to write it in the way that I wanted to. And there is something that is a real privilege, I think, really, and that Pushkin, who published it, have allowed me to do that. That is a real privilege. I think the thing is, you have to write the stories that you want to tell and the things that are burning through you. Otherwise, I think if you're trying to second guess the market, I don't know who you're writing for. I mean, I'm basically writing for myself, aged kind of like 12, 13, really, because I think that's all you can write for. If you're not right, you have to write the stories that you want to tell and the stories that you want to read, and you have to write them because you can't read them until you've written it, because it doesn't exist yet. And I think anything else is you're just sort of doing marketing, really. Nothing wrong with marketing, but, you know, I want to write stories I want to tell.
Yeah, I find lots of books are sort of leaping onto sort of social issues that seem to be very of the moment, and then there'll be a novel about teenage characters going through this or going through that, or I mean, at the moment it's gender confusion, and like every other book is about kids with gender confusion, and it feels like they will date in a way, that this is a very current obsession. And I was just thinking back to somebody like Catherine Rundell, who's done incredibly well with her books. And this is why it's not a diss, you know, I would say that those two are, you know, Philip Womack, good friend of mine, writes wonderful children's books. And they're in this, you know, this magical vein that we don't have to have everything that's about gritty. I mean, there is a little bit of grit in this because poor Kit is having a very rough time at school, isn't she?
Yeah, there's a bullying is going on, and again I wanted it to be still reaching her in Pembrokeshire, even though it's winter and it's the Christmas holidays and she's away from her normal environment. But she has got a mobile phone. She's got one of those basic mobile phones, the Nokias that we all had back in the day, and so she is reachable, and the messages she's getting on it read in a fairly innocuous way, but it's the subtext of them is threatening. And so I wanted that to still be kind of an undercurrent in it, that whilst all this sort of crazy stuff is happening, that Libby's disappeared, that there's also this element of the very real. There's that kind of threat as well as like the much bigger threat of everything that we know has shifted. But yeah, poor Kit's not having a great time.
Yeah, it's sort of a form of gaslighting, I guess you'd call it, because these messages, like you say, they're like, hey, you haven't forgotten me, have you? You know, and they could be read in quite an innocent way. So that's why she feels it's very hard to say anything to anybody. This is where good old story comes in again, and it's sort of he empowers her. But we won't go into too much of what happens. I wanted to talk a little bit about the illustrations, because so here's the hardback. It's beautiful, and even inside you've got these are these the end papers, I think.
Yeah, they're gorgeous.
Really gorgeous. And he is it's Tom de Freston, who's rather a significant illustrator at the moment, isn't he, of children's books?
He's the most incredible artist. I mean, he is genuinely one of my favourite artists, actually. And I still can't believe I got to work with him. I'm a huge fan of his work. I really love it. It's very visceral, and there's something very powerful about the way he uses a lot of mixed media. So he'll use ink and paints, but he'll also use printing. So he'll use a load of different things, and he'll experiment a lot. And I love that kind of experimentation in his work. But yeah, I still can't believe I got to work with him. I mean, he's become a really good friend now, and I feel very lucky because writers and illustrators are normally kept fairly separate, and rightly so, because you don't want the writer trying to dictate to the illustrator what they should be doing, because that's so rude. And I remember early on when Tom and I were in touch, actually, and because I knew him a tiny bit, so I sort of said, is it true? Are you really going to do it? Like, is this a dream? And then we sort of started exchanging messages and talking about kind of the different ideas in the book, and all sorts of kind of other things about life in general, about Neolithic history, about geography and geology, the natural world, all sorts of kind of different things. And it's been lovely. But early on, he did say to me, oh, how do you envisage the cover? And I was like, I envisage the cover however you envisage the cover, Tom. That's not because there's, I would never come up with anything that's even a millionth of what he would come up with. That's not how my brain works, But yeah, it's been a real joy to work with him. He's an absolute treasure and a real deep thinker. And I just love his artwork so much.
Well, I mean, it's so interesting because we got the stone circle, but it actually took a while for me to see that there is a tiny little figure of Libby in her red boots flying through the air, and I sort of it's such a rich and kind of dense image. Oh, I've just noticed that as well. That's the white church tower. So he's got it all. He really gets it, doesn't he? He gets this story so well.
It's incredible. And I'd never really thought about the kind of the red boots and the character falling in terms of Alice in Wonderland until I saw the cover. And I suddenly thought, I've nicked that then.
Well, there's nothing original really, is there? And,
no, it's fine.
And throughout there's these lovely little drawings as well, sort of. So it's a beautifully presented little hardback book, perfect for Christmas, just coming up. I did wonder about this, a Sarah Odedina book. What does that mean?
So Sarah's my editor. And she only does, I think she does 6 children's books a year. But she's a bit of a legend in the kind of industry. She's worked with all sorts. She edited Holes by Louis Sachar. She edited The Graveyard Book by Neil Gaiman, Maggot Moon by Sally Gardner. So she's got this kind of, she's an absolute legend. She's also hilariously funny and lovely, and I love working with her. And so working with her on Bearmouth, my first one, and then working with her on this has just been tremendous fun. She's also an annoyingly brilliant ceramicist as well, which is just showing really. My dinner plates are ones that she's made.
Wow.
She's really brilliant at ceramics. It's
amazing.
Yeah, it's annoying though. It's like, come on, share out the talent, Sarah. Yeah, Sarah Dediner, she's incredible. But yeah, I think because she has that sort of reputation in the industry, I'm more than happy for her name to go on the cover.
Right. Yeah.
And I'm really glad that Tom's name's on the cover as well. I think it's really important that illustrators get their artwork credited properly.
Yes. Yeah, not just a tiny little thing and the inside back flap. Well, the other thing about Tom de Freston is that I came across his work because he did the 25th anniversary edition, I think it was, of Skellig, David Almond, and at the launch, I mean, the artwork is enormous, and it was on display in a gallery here, and it was incredible. I mean, they were just image after image, and they're huge. They're really enormous. These, so much work has gone into them, and he just seemed a very cool and funny and unassuming guy as well. Sort of
He's unbelievably modest.
Yeah.
He actually said to me the other day, I don't think I'm any good at doing cover artwork. I was like, what are you talking about? You crazy, man. But yeah, he's lovely. I mean, one of the things that he said, I have to share this because I just think it's bananas, but it gives you a little kind of insight into how his brain works. So the end papers, which you showed earlier, so those end papers, they're actually all the illustrations from within the book. But he was thinking about quantum physics, and he was thinking about time and time slips, and how, the idea of quantum physics is that everything can exist in the same moment at the same time. And so that's what he wanted for the end papers, so that you have all those images colliding with each other as if they all exist in that same moment, in that kind of, like click of a finger, the blink of an eye. I just love that that's where his brain went. And then that's the beautiful result of it. But that's where the idea came from. It's just, yeah, brilliant. I love working with him. I'm just going to cling on to him as my friend, whether he likes it or not. Because he's always recommending weird books that I've never heard of, and we sort of swap ideas about books. And there's one that I recommended him, which is really obscure, but it's called The Archaeology of Cinema by Lauren Manoni. So it's quite an academic book, but it's about the pursuit of moving images, and it starts with cave paintings. You think it would start with something more modern, but I love the idea. He goes right back, and his argument is that cave paintings are so rarely seen now, how they would have been seen, how they would have been painted by flickering light. And if you look at them through a flickering light, they do appear to sort of move and shift, because you get the shadows playing with the actual images, so that you are trying to kind of recreate that movement. And so his argument is that that's what we've always tried to do. We've always been trying to show people, this is how I see the world, this is how I experience the world, to show others how you experience it. And Tom went and got a copy, and he's recommended me some brilliantly mad stuff. Like, we've kind of had this weird exchange of, I've just read this very strange book about this, and so it's great. Yeah, it's been such a joy to work with him, and to be working back with Pushkin again. Yeah, it's been a lovely.
So did they publish Bearmouth as well?
Right. Yeah. So I've done 2 books with Pushkin now. And they've just reissued Bearmouth with a new cover from Tom as well, which is also stunning. And again, very different.
Oh, I'm not sure it's in this. I think it was in the proof. There's also a little advert for that. I mean, Bearmouth is very, very different, but I suppose you pick the style of telling that goes with the story. You're not going to do exactly the same thing again, are you?
No, I mean, Bearmouth's told in a dialect that I made up. And Newt, the main character, is learning to read and write, so the spellings improve. So it's told quite almost like phonetically, and the spellings improve as it goes on, and I would never, ever do that again.
Was it a nightmare?
Well, I sort of thought that I'd done a fairly good job on it in terms of like the spellings, and that there is there's sort of inconsistent consistency, and consistent inconsistent. So it kind of, I thought I'd done quite a good job, until the copy editor, who was amazingly patient, came back and said, "Here are the list of spellings that weren't on your list that change." And it was about 3 A4 pages long, and I was like, "Oh, sorry about that," But I do like first person present tense. I know obviously Philip Pullman thinks I should be shot for it, because he said something a while ago. It's a dereliction of duty towards the reader. And I thought, I'm a huge Philip Pullman fan. I think he's a brilliant writer, but I did think no writer should ever dictate to another writer how a story should be told. I think that is a very bad route to go down. So sorry, Philip, but it's first person present tense again.
Yeah.
I like the immediacy of it, and that and the restriction that you can only know what that character knows. You can only experience the world as they are experiencing it. I really like that kind of sort of restriction to it. Yeah.
And talk a little bit. I mean, it's not true to say that they're just the young characters. There are a couple of mysterious people in the book. I mean, how much of that do you want to put in? You don't want them to overshadow the young characters. I mean, this thing about perspective, it's very important that Kit figures stuff out for herself. And it's also important that she doesn't know things at various stages. I mean, it's a very sort of straightforward story. The through line is very straightforward. But when you're writing, do you sometimes think, oh, my God, she doesn't know that yet? Or how can I bring this about in a natural way? These are the sort of storytelling problems you have to solve, aren't they?
Yeah, I don't know. I do tend to plot it out quite a bit in advance. Like because it does take place over, really quite a short period of time, days really. So I have to work out kind of what is happening in that time, where they are, and what they can realistically do, because I really there's an example I'll give that it was a friend who watched Babe, the film version, and it's the sheepdog who talks and the pig who talks. And the thing that he went, well, I stopped believing in it then, was because the sheepdog ran further than he thought was possible in a short period of time. And that was the thing that really took him out of the story and went, oh, well, that's ridiculous. The dog can talk, but it can't run that fast. And I think it's such a brilliant thing, because it is that what's the straw that breaks the camel's back. So I think it's that thing of like, I didn't want them to be able to find easy solutions. I wanted it to make it quite hard. So it is almost like a kind of very mild, like detective story, and them trying to work out what's happened. It's not a detective story, but that kind of sense of mystery of what's happened. But they can't do the things that we would do now of just kind of look on their smartphone and Google missing children. Have there been any strange missing disappearances around this area in the last 50 years? They can't do any of those things. And I wanted that kind of, it's not that long ago, but that lack of kind of technology to force them to sort of explore things in a more old-fashioned way, I suppose, that we'd see it now. And I think that also does add to, like you say, there is sort of an old-fashioned quality to the story, and I don't mind that, because it is a book for kids who like books, really. It's for the kids who probably don't tell the other kids in their class that they do go out bird watching, or that they know the names of the different birds that they can hear sing, or they can recognise the tunes, or like, it's for those kids. And if you're a kid who's not like that, then it might still be for you. I hope it is, but I think it is for those bookish kids, really. Yeah.
Well, I mentioned David Almond. And I think I saw, I don't know if it's in the press release or something, that there is a sort of, a compelling fantasy adventure in the vein of Marcus Sedgwick and David Almond. Would you agree? I mean, David Almond, well, both of them are very good names to be associated with. Does that sort of feel slightly weird, though?
Yeah. Yeah, I mean, I'm a huge David Almond fan. I think he's an absolutely brilliant writer, and I think, again, his stuff is often rooted in a sense of place, and that's what I wanted to do with this. I mean, Marcus Sedgwick, I think, I can't believe he's gone. I'm still in denial. I think he was such a brilliant writer, and I love the fact that he skipped around. He wrote different genres. He wrote so many kind of wildly different things. I mean, yeah, it's interesting, isn't it? I wouldn't compare myself to either of them. I mean, for me, I think it's kind of my sort of biggest influences with it were probably definitely Alan Garner, definitely sort of Susan Cooper, but also like Helen Cresswell, like Moondial, that was they made a TV series of when I was a kid, sort of Box of Delights, those sorts of things.
Yes, yeah.
And then some of the creepy stuff that I watched as a kid. I mean, I didn't watch Children of the Stones until I was older, but some of those kind of things that are around in the sort of folk horror, I think we'd probably kind of call it now, then sort of in the sort of 80s, and things that were repeated from the 70s, those sorts of things I think have kind of infused the sort of the atmosphere, I think, as well. But yeah, it's sort of weird because I wouldn't compare myself to, I mean, Alan Garner is just it's extraordinary writer, and Susan Cooper's written so many other things, and I think when we say Susan Cooper, everyone always thinks of The Dark is Rising, but she's written many other brilliant books as well. But yeah, like all of those things, I suppose, have sort of, I guess, kind of fed into it. Yeah.
Did there come a time when you were a kid reading where you thought, I want to be a writer, I want to make up my own stories?
Probably. I mean, I just did make up my own stories, but we didn't know anyone who was, the idea that you could be a writer. I mean, I do remember being surprised that Michael Rosen was a real person. I know that sounds ridiculous, but because I was introduced to his books when I was at junior school. Mr. Froud, Peter Froud. I love you, Peter Froud. Amazing teacher. He introduced us to so many fantastic writers, but Michael Rosen was the one that made me kind of go, I feel seen. Quick, Let's Get Out of Here is still one of my absolute favourite books. So there was that, but I don't know. Yeah, it's hard, isn't it?
It is. I mean, I wanted to talk a little bit. I mean, I love Alan Garner. I think when we did the event in Shropshire, I think you just dropped the name of Garner in connection with this book. And I thought, because I just can't get enough of his sort of mystery. And he also, with the books like Red Shift, he has this sort of cosmic sense that's very much part of the 12. I mean, we've talked about a setting which is a small place on the Pembrokeshire coast, but actually, if we want to be very grand, it's all space and all the time. And that seems very Garner-esque, doesn't it? To sort of pull back.
Yeah, that's true. And Boneland as well, I think. Boneland's very kind of... Boneland, I've read it so many times, and every time I read it, it's different. It's like shapeshifts. I don't understand how he's done that. Every time I read it, there's something in it that I almost hadn't noticed before, and it's like, how is that possible? I've read this so many times. But I think Boneland and Treacle Walker are his two finest books. I think they're just extraordinary, and he's so minimalist. He's much more minimalist than I know I can ever be, but he's got that incredible, that sort of like essence of storytelling. It's like it's in his bones. And I would love to know more about kind of what his actual process is. And I know he doesn't really speak to writers. He hangs out with archaeologists and stuff, which is very cool. He's 90, he can do what he wants.
Exactly.
But I do love the sort of the minimalism, but that sense of like deep time that I think is in his stories. I think he's an amazing writer. I
love The Owl Service, and I read that as a teenager, and that just, I don't know, that sunk very deep, and yet it's such an odd story, and the characters are odd, and it was certainly made into a very odd TV series as well. There's just something you can't totally wrap up with Alan Garner. You can't totally understand it. There's always something a bit, but how does he do that? Or why is that there? Or why does she say that? There's always something completely mysterious.
So true. Yeah, that's exactly it. That's exactly it. I've been trying to put my finger on it for ages, but that's exactly it. That is that actually there is always that element of you feel like you've understood enough of it to have really kind of enjoyed it for it to have sunk into your kind of soul. But there's an element that makes you also want to go back because you feel like you've missed something. Yeah. And the fact that you can do that repeatedly with pretty much any of his books, I think shows you that he's an absolute master. I mean, there's no one else. There's no one else that writes like that. He's an absolute one-off. I hope he's here for another 90 years. I think he might be immortal anyway. He might be like some kind of weird god.
He might be. He might just go underground somewhere in Cheshire and
hibernate and then come back out.
Regenerate. Yeah, he'll go down with the knights of King Arthur and have a long sleep and then come back when we need him again. I think that's what will happen to Garner. I mean, for Treacle Walker, he was shortlisted for the Booker Prize, and I went along to the ceremony. And he was beamed in, looking rather bemused from Cheshire. He was on a giant screen, and Dua Lipa sung "Happy Birthday" to him because it was, in fact, his birthday. And it's just one of the oddest Booker moments, or indeed any moments, I think.
I would love to have been there for that. I can imagine the faint bemusement on his face. That's superb.
Yeah, he was just sitting in his armchair, blown up to giant size. And she might have led us all singing Happy Birthday. It was just very, very strange indeed. But I'm sure he took it in his stride.
It's interesting what you say though, because I was thinking about Treacle Walker, and then I was thinking about because there's the sort of the chimney plays a key part in it. And I read this really interesting book called Inside the Neolithic Mind, and it is all about kind of sort of it's kind of touches on early religions, but it's about kind of also neurology and how, you know, humans in the past would have had the same brains as us, and what they might have seen, and, you know, patterns and artwork and all these sorts of things. Really genuinely fascinating book. But one of the things in it is, I'm going to say, it's about chimneys. It's not really about chimneys, but it's about the link between, you know, underground, like Earth basically, and then sky, and those things of kind of those sort of three elements, and how they linked, how chimneys are sort of were seen as perhaps linking those things together, that you had almost like the past, the present and the future, and the kind of different religious sort of layers perhaps of that as well, different belief systems. And I just thought it was so interesting how he plays with those concepts in Treacle Walker as well, and that kind of the hearth and the family, and that idea of the hearthstone and the warmth being such a kind of key part of that book. But actually I think he's kind of got quite a lot of really ancient sort of ideas in there that are so embedded in us that we can't even unravel ourselves from them in a way. Yeah. Sorry, I just had to talk about chimneys for a minute.
Yeah. Well, I mean, it's funny, if you remember when we did our event in Oxford that was about your grown-up novel. Adult novel all sounds very strange. The Illusions. I couldn't get you off the topic of Victorian bicycles.
Oh yeah, I went on about the penny farthing for a bit.
Yes, yeah, which didn't really have that much to do with the book.
I think there's a bike in about 2 pages of that book.
But presumably you'd sort of gone into this in quite a bit of detail. Like, I mean, for a book like, I mean, they're both set in Victorian-ish era, aren't they? So presumably you have to do an awful lot of research before you even put pen to paper with those. And you find yourself going down these rabbit holes, like, you know, the early history of the bicycle.
Yeah. Yeah, because also it's that thing of, I want it to, it doesn't have to be real, it has to feel real. And so it's like a lot of the research doesn't go, you know, it just goes into my head and then out my mouth at events when I talk about bicycles or chimneys. But I think it's that thing of knowing as much as you can what that kind of historical world was like. What was it like in 1840 in London, and what was it like in 1840 in Shropshire, and sort of knowing what the differences are, knowing what the similarities are, all those things, like what you would have eaten, what your room, you know, if you had a bedroom, what your bedroom would have been like, who you might have shared with, like all those kind of little details that kind of help bring it alive. But you use so little of it really in the book, but I think it is that thing of like infusing it with a sense of place and atmosphere. But yeah, I for the Gifts, which was my first grown-up one, buttons was my I went down a rabbit hole on buttons for half a day. There's an online button museum, and that was I had a lovely time wasting quite a few hours looking at buttons and the history of buttons and manufacturing buttons in Birmingham. Yeah.
Did much of that go in the book, or
about a paragraph?
Right. Yeah.
A couple of paragraphs, I think it made it in.
I think we can all sort of tell when somebody's gone overboard on research, because in some books it is like, you know, the carriage came down the street, its beechwood panels polished with wax, and the horses are, you know, and everything's like too much described. This person has sort of gone into it too much. I mean, I read something that, like, there would, I think all the characters go on shipboard, and there was far too much about all the different sorts of wood making up this bloody sailing ship, you know. So you've got to keep a bit of a rein on yourself, haven't you?
Yeah, you do, and it's hard because it's really interesting, and you kind of want to share that information to a certain extent. You do want to write more about buttons because you think, well, who knew that about buttons? Isn't that fascinating? But you know, does it belong in the book? And usually the answer is no, or like it might be a paragraph, and that's fine, you know. But the joy of discovering it and of learning about it should be enough in itself. I read a book.
Reward.
yeah, I read a book once, and it was pages and pages of someone's hallway, and it was the colour of the day rail, and then it was the pictures, and it described all the pictures, and it just slowed down the action so much. What I wanted was what happens next. And you know, the hallway was cluttered with pictures, would have told us the same amount. We didn't need to know that all that information about the pictures, you know. And I'm sure that I put too much information in mine as well. But I think, you have to be aware of what's the story, what's the point of this scene. And sometimes the point of this scene is that it is kind of about character. It doesn't have to be kind of always moving the kind of story along.
Yeah.
I do think you do have to kind of take a step back and go, do I need this scene? What's it doing? What's it here for? And then cut it if it doesn't need to be there.
Yeah, I mean, do you remember that kind of trend for using sort of screenwriting manuals? So, you know, you can't mention something unless it's actually going to be used in some way further on. I mean, that, it seems, is no good either, you know, actually doing like beats, as they call them, and, you know, 3-part structure or whatever. That all got a bit tiresome, didn't it?
I think I completely agree. And you get it a lot in Hollywood, where they've all read the same screenwriting manuals, and they've all read the same. They've all read The Man with 1,000 Faces, or whatever it's called, which is, I have to say, I read the first 50 pages and I got so bored. It's it's of its time, and there's nothing wrong with that. And it's an interesting sort of snapshot of its time in a way. And Joseph Campbell was clearly a very clever man, and it is interesting, but it's all about men. It's just the most male book written by a man I think I've ever come across. And I can see why some people find it useful, but at the same time you kind of think, read other fairy tales, read other stories, read other really old stories, read myths and legends. You know, they're the stories that kind of, I think, are sort of again built into us. And I think, I don't know, I always think it's really interesting when I do quite a lot of writing workshops with kids and with adults. Yeah. And so much of it, people know what a good story is, because if you say to them, all right, what's the best film that you've watched recently and why? They will come up with something. Or what's the best TV series, or what's the best book that you read recently and why? And they will be able to explain why they like the story and why those characters were satisfying. And I think there's a kind of an inbuilt understanding of storytelling that you don't have to go and read all those books. I mean, if you want to, fine, you know, and if you want to go and you can afford to do an MA in creative writing, then fantastic. But I didn't do any of those things. I've just read a lot of books, watched a lot of films, watched a lot of telly, went to the theatre a lot, carried on doing all those things. And I think that's where my storytelling comes from. I don't want to follow a kind of, this is how you write a book. You know, this is my 3-act structure, and this is the bit where this is the bit where you have your kind of crisis moment. It's like, well, if you, those things should be kind of, they should come naturally to you. And if they don't, then you can still tell brilliant stories that don't follow those exact same conventions. I mean, they're not really rules, are they? They're conventions. That you can play with those things. I mean, that's more rebellious than I feel then.
Yeah. There's another book which I really enjoyed, the 7 Basic Plots book, which is, again, it's sort of ingenious in that it will just say, Don Giovanni, you know, it will set out, these are these rules, and this is what fiction does, and this is what storytelling does, and then it will take like an opera or anything and amazingly fit it in. So it's very interesting to read, but I don't know that it helps particularly. I mean, I've retained practically none of it. You know, I enjoyed reading it, but I haven't got any more idea about what the plots are and, you know, how it's all supposed to work. I think
me too. That's the same thing. I mean, I read The Science of Storytelling by Will Storr, which is actually a brilliant book, and that is fascinating. And it's interesting because he goes into kind of the neuroscience of it in terms of like language, and that if you're reading language that is, you're reading slightly hackneyed phrases, the synapses in your brain don't light up in the same way as when you're using language in a kind of sort of fresher, more original way. But obviously if you use it in a way that is so fresh and original people can't understand what you mean, that's no good either. So it's kind of that sort of happy balance, and I found that a really interesting book. But again, like you, I've retained that's what I've retained out of the whole book pretty much. But I think the way to learn to tell stories is just to absorb stories, and then you find out, and to ask questions about those stories. Why did I like this? What did I find interesting about it? What did I find less satisfying, and why? I mean, I am a nightmare to go to the cinema with, because I will come out of the cinema and be like, now, the thing that I thought was very interesting about, not just start, and also having done kind of, film reviews and stuff in the past, it's like, I think that kind of analytical brain is actually a really good thing to have, because it does make you think about story and character and what's satisfying and what isn't, but also that it is all subjective. Like that's my version of, my view of what I think is a satisfying story. Yeah.
I mean, I loved, I was a theatre critic, and I still do a bit of theatre criticism, and that's so interesting because there's so many different, like, is it the acting? Is it on and off night? Is it the writing? Is the director mad? Why is the set like that? The sound cues really get in the way. You can just go into it endlessly. And then, like you say, those are the things that you have spotted that somebody else would not, would not be as bothered by or interested in. And that is I think that's a very good training for understanding storytelling. And then when I became a TV critic, and I didn't really know much about TV, oh dear, but I thought it's storytelling. It's just storytelling in a different way. And the thing about TV is the stories are incredibly long. Like, they're like 40 hours long of something. But it's still, it's still storytelling, and you still have a sort of, we all have a basic grammar of storytelling. I think that's what. Yeah,
definitely. Definitely. And I think the more theatre you see, and the more TV you watch, and the more films that you can go and see, and I think the more you can do all of those things as well, that you see how different stories fit in different ways. And particularly if you read a book and then you watch a film adaptation, or you've watched a film and then you go and see it on stage, or any of those things where you see how the same story can be told differently. I mean, really the same story can be told so differently in different ways. I think that's a really kind of good thing to do as well. And that was Stuart Lee, who is a fantastic comedian, quite kind of an anarchic comedian, but he always says, you can only come, you should only come and see my show if you've seen 100 other stand-up shows, which I kind of love, because he kind of explores storytelling in his shows, and he dissects it in front of you whilst explaining what he's doing. And he'll say, I'm going to refer back to this in about 20 minutes and you will find it funny then. And then he'll carry on and he'll go, and you do, because and it's so brilliant. And in a way, he is kind of right in that the more other stuff you've seen, the more you understand what he's doing. I think if you went along and saw him as your first experience of stand-up comedy, you might not enjoy it in the same way, because you don't understand the things, you wouldn't necessarily know the things you're referring to and kind of taking the mick out of. But I kind of, I love that idea. I did go and see I have to say, this terrible production of Macbeth I went to see. I'm so sorry everyone who's involved in it. I was so excited about seeing it, but they had a clock on stage, and all the clock did was count down how long the play was. It didn't count down anything else. And I remember reading this thing, and that the director had said that Macbeth was all about time, which it isn't. I mean, it's just not. And so this clock, but it was about 3.5 hours long, and Macbeth is not a long. It's not that long a play. And I just looked at this clock in horror, and I thought, God, we've got like 2.5 hours left. We've only done an hour. And I'm afraid to say I did leave in the interval,
right,
which is very rare. I really the optimist in me always wants to, you know, like, oh, it might get better in the second half, might get more interesting. But the clock was
just did it. Yeah. Well, I mean, that is the very rare example. I mean, I suppose it's the director, but I saw a production of Macbeth that just had the most ridiculous set that just sloped steeply up, and you just saw people kind of looming and tottering, and they had to sort of toil up this, and you're just like, God, just flatten it down. Like, it doesn't. Like, what's it doing? What?
I think it's that thing, isn't it? Sometimes when people are doing Shakespeare, sometimes there's that assumption of, I have to make this different to all the other Shakespeares that I've seen as the director, rather than people are going to come and see this show who've never seen this play before. Yeah. Just make it a good, you don't have to have some kind of huge overriding kind of concept for it. You can just do a really good production of that, particularly for Macbeth. Macbeth is such a tight play, really. You don't have do that much to it, that it's still a tight, powerful play. But it was the clock. I just thought, what? All it's doing is telling us how long we've got to sit here until this finishes. No. Yeah,
it wouldn't even give you much of a sense of building tension or anything like that.
No. What's the purpose? It literally was just, it was almost like something that should have been backstage, that kind of, this is how long you've got until you're freed, allowed out into the world.
It might help the stage manager, but hardly anybody else.
But not the audience.
Certainly not the audience. The thing about different forms of storytelling, there was a great example. This was in lockdown. I was sort of digging out old audiobooks, and I listened to one of Rebecca, which again is almost a perfect plot, just brilliant book. And so you read it in a different way. Like when you're a teenager, it's like, they're so in love, Max de Winter and unnamed heroine. It's a beautiful story. Thank God, the first wife got killed, but she sounded cool. But, you just read it in a certain way. And then you read it and it becomes more sinister, and he becomes not such a great guy. But Mrs. Danvers is always this sort of evil witch. And in this reading, Mrs. Danvers is the person who represents justice. Her mistress has been killed. She has been murdered by that guy. And Mrs. Danvers is actually going to bring justice. And she just becomes this sympathetic character. And you realise how slippery the conversations are with Max de Winter. And he is like, a wife killing. I mean, he could be a serial killer. Mrs. Unnamed isn't in a great situation herself if she steps out of line. Do you know what I mean? And I never read it like that. And it was just the brilliance of this, one actress voicing the book and making Mrs. Danvers, a human being. Isn't that the sign of a fantastic book, that it, again, what we've been saying about these different levels and ways of approaching?
It's brilliant. And also that element as well of returning to a book at different stages in your life and how you see very different things. I think, books that, I remember my mum saying to me, oh yes, I really loved, Mansfield Park when I was about your age. I think I was about 18 at the time. And so I was like, oh, Persuasion's really boring. And she was like, yeah, there will come a time in your life where you'll understand and really appreciate how beautiful Persuasion is. Oh, I don't think so. oh yes, no, she's right. Yes, she's right. Because it is that thing of you read it through, your the view of your own life, and as you get older things change and you have different experiences, and you do kind of understand books in different ways. I mean, I remember when I was a kid I read Children of the New Forest, and I remember even when I was very little being quite cross that Pablo the gypsy he could sleep outside. Oh, it's okay, he doesn't need a blanket. And I remember thinking, that seems wildly unfair. And now, of course, I think, wow, that seems wildly racist. Just that thing of kind of, and like some of the books that, like The Little Princess is awful. I mean, so unbelievably snobbish.
Oh, I should read it again, actually. Yeah, I haven't read it for years and years.
Yeah, and again, it's the same thing of like, oh, poor little Sarah, you know, she needs 8 blankets because, you know, and she needs a
She's special.
She's special because she's from a very rich family. And it's, yeah, you read it now and you just think, oh, well, tough luck. Sleep on the same mattress as the poor other serving girls that have to work. You know, it's, yeah, it's interesting how those things, how you kind of shift on certain things. I really love talking about Daphne du Maurier, who I am a huge fan of. I think The Parasites is so underrated, and I don't understand why it's not better. It's absolutely brilliant. It's quite weird. It's about three children who kind of grow up, and their father's an opera singer and their mum's an actress, or possibly the other way around, whatever. But they're in the theatre, so it's kind of theatre, music hall, opera. It's kind of big fur coats and 1930s, and it's all rather sort of fabulous. And these kids grow up into adults, and it's what happens to them and their relationship. And they're sort of, one is the child of both those parents, and the others, like the father and the mother, both had a child before they got together. So it's sort of step siblings and sort of relationships between them, and it's kind of slightly taboo. And it's a really fascinating book. I've read that quite a lot of times, and again, every time I read it, I sort of I feel like I see something different in it. And I love, obviously, I love all the theatre stuff in it because it's just brilliantly done. But I really like the kind of the interplay between those siblings and the expectations that if your parents are hugely famous in a particular field, what pressure that puts on you if you also want to go into that field, if you want to be a musician and your father's an opera singer, or if you want to be an actress and your mother's also been that kind of, I think it's still a really interesting book. Yeah, it's fascinating.
It's about Nepo babies. Right,
yeah, yeah, exactly. Yeah. That's what it's about.
I've got to check it out. No, that sounds amazing. And she was also the most incredible short story writer. And I read a collection of hers. I was pretty much at school, probably in the 6th form, and some of them, they're just part of me. They're just such incredible stories. And you know, I think it's, you know, Don't Look Now. I can't remember what the story is called, or if it is called Don't Look Now, but there's something about the short stories that make absolutely incredible films. Yeah. And The Birds is another example. They've just, I think she is sort of underrated, because I think she's seen as a bit of a women's writer. And she's the equal of anyone, you know, Graham Greene or anyone in her craft and her storytelling, I think.
Completely. Absolutely. And I think it's also because she was popular, that there's there's a kind of, you know, I think around, if you were a female writer then and you were popular, there was a snobbery around you, like you say, like, mass market women's fiction. But she was a phenomenal storyteller, and the characterization is brilliant. I remember reading Rebecca when I was quite young, and I found it so weird and fascinating, and I kind of wanted to sort of be in it as well. So I was like, how could I write myself in? Could I be like a little maidservant in the background? Like, how can I kind of, just fascinating. And The Parasites particularly, just because it is that world of kind of, it is that sort of theatrical world, but that theatrical world in that particular time period, which holds, you know, huge fascination for me anyway.
Well, her father, George du Maurier, was he an actor or a playwright or something? I mean, she in a sense, she was a sort of Nepo baby herself, really, wasn't she? But
I think it was a different field. I don't think he was or maybe if he was a playwright, maybe. I don't know. I can't remember. His work hasn't lasted as well as hers.
No. I think I have a feeling he might have been an actor. But I'm not sure.
But she is, I agree. I think she is just actually generally really underrated. And I think it's such a pity, because her work is extraordinary.
I'm definitely going to investigate The Parasites, because
I really think you'll love it.
Yeah.
I'll report that. And it goes to some quite, it asks quite a lot of questions, and I like the way that it leaves certain things unresolved. And it's got an end that haunts me, still haunts me. I've read that book so many times, and I get to the end and I'm like, maybe it's not, maybe I've rewritten it, maybe it's like by the time I get here, like to the end, it'll be, but yeah, it's a powerful book and says so much about everything and nothing. It was one of those books just about life, really.
Yeah.
I really hope, I think you'll love it. I hope you love it.
You're a rereader, very evidently. Do you ever reread your own books?
God, no.
Don't take them down, have a quick look.
No, because I think the problem is you've reread it a million times before the blimmin' thing's printed. You have to kind of, so you've got that first draft, which is you're always really excited about, and you press send, and as it goes off, you immediately start thinking, yeah, that bit's not working as well as I thought it was. I think that means it. And you have this moment of joy of like, ding, like, oh, nailed it. And then as it goes off, like traveling through the internet to my agent, it's like, no, I know that's going to need some work. And then of course you rework it, and then you rework it again, and then it's and I love editing. I absolutely love editing because it's problem solving. So it's like, well, this doesn't quite work. What might work instead, or what might work better, or do we need this, or do we need that character, or do we need more of this earlier, or all of those sorts of things. But yeah, it's the proofing. But by the time it gets to the proofing stage, I never want to look at it again, because I've looked at it 1,000 times, and all I can see is, should I have used a comma there, or like maybe I should have used an exclamation mark, should that be in italics, and it's, you can't see the people, you can't see it for what it is, you can't see the story anymore. All you can see is the grammar, really, and the punctuation and the spelling, and you can't see the story. So I do struggle with, and also just, I always want to move on to the next thing, really. I'm always most excited about the thing I'm currently working on, which is often not the thing that I'm talking about, because that's the project that's just come out, and I'm kind of 1 or 2 projects ahead and really getting really excited about that and want to talk about that. But
will there be more? Is this the start of a series? That's it. That's
No, I think it ends. It ends where it ends with good reason, I think. And I don't know, this is going to sound a weird thing to say. I think it's quite important for stories sometimes, for me anyway, that I let the reader fill in what happens next. Because I always used to really love that when I was a kid and reading books, that when stories end, I sort of wonder what happens to those characters, and I kind of come up with what might happen to them, or where they might go. And I think you have to respect that a reader's imagination will fill other bits in. And I always want to write something else, something different. I don't think I'll ever probably write a series, because my brain's too butterfly. It's landed on another nice flower of an idea and it wants to do that, and then it's off again, and then it's landed on another flower of an idea. I think I'm too sort of scattergun. It was interesting. I met Philip Reeve recently, who I'm a huge fan of. Fantastic, absolutely fantastic writer. His new one's incredible. And the way that he's created such a huge, gigantic fantasy world in sort of the Mortal Engines world, over hundreds of years. Like, he kind of knows that world, how it shifts and changes, and the politics of it over hundreds of years. And it blows my mind that he can do that. It's just not how my brain works, but I'm so in awe of people who can do that. I think I'm just too impatient. I just want to move on to the next thing. More imaginary friends that I can play with.
Yeah. more buttons to look at.
More buttons. More chimneys.
More chimneys and buttons. Okay, let's move on to the 3 questions that I ask everybody at the end of the session. Favourite artwork? What did you go for?
It's really hard, because I love so much art, and I love loads of different art for different reasons, depending on my mood and all sorts of different things. I'm gonna choose something that's a bit wild card. Actually, I'm gonna go for something that's from ancient Egypt, and I love it for lots of reasons, but actually it kind of ties in quite well with the book. I hadn't really thought about that till just now. But it's a brooch. It's a huge brooch that was found in Tutankhamun's tomb. And it's got this kind of, it's a scarab beetle, and the kind of the center of the brooch is this incredible, it looks like amber almost, but it's Libyan desert glass. And so it's glass that was formed when a meteorite hit the desert. That's how Libyan desert glass is formed. And they knew that it was rare and that it was special. And so this brooch, which has got kind of gold and all sorts of other things on it, just this bit of glass that is caused by something that's come from space. It blows my mind. And it's so beautiful. It's such a beautiful object, but I love the kind of the story behind it as well. I just think it's fascinating. So I'm sure it weighs a ton and would be wildly heavy to wear, but I'd quite like it.
Have you seen the actual thing? Where is it?
It's in Cairo. I'd love to see it. I mean, there was a Tutankhamun exhibition when I was about 10 or 11, I think, that came over to the British Museum, and I've sort of been obsessed with Howard Carter really ever sort of since. I just think he's such a fascinating individual. I was hoping Tom Stoppard might write a play about him at one stage, because I thought he ticks a lot of Stoppard's boxes. You know, may or may not have been gay, you know, I think kind of probably bisexual, didn't have a conventional sort of academic upbringing, you know, was an artist and then kind of fell into kind of working out there as an artist and then sort of became an archaeologist. So, you know, self-taught, very, very clever man, very interesting. But yeah, I just thought, oh, well, you know, he's done a Houseman who is considerably less interesting. Sorry, Houseman, that you are. Maybe he'll do Howard Carter, and he hasn't done. So I hope he gets on with it. I would. But yeah, no, sadly, I don't think I've ever seen it. I would love to go to Cairo, and I would love to see it. I'd love to kind of do this whole, oh, I'm an author that's visiting, perhaps I could touch the shiny object. They're probably going, no, we get that all the time, bog off.
I always thought Schliemann was very interesting, who excavated Troy, and he used to, I mean, the jewellery, he sort of put it on his wife. He had a younger wife, and she'd sort of be decked out in all this ancient gold. And then the other thing about him was that he spoke a ridiculous number of languages, or he knew a ridiculous number of languages. So, yeah, these people are amazing, aren't they? They are. Giant characters.
Yeah, and fascinating. And I really love that Carter got into trouble because a French party of wealthy people kind of turned up and said, this was before he discovered Tutankhamun, but he got kind of chucked into the wilderness for a few years. And they said, oh, can we come and look at the tomb? And there were a couple of kind of fairly low paid security guards there who said, well, no, you can't come. You can't come in. You can't just kind of come in. We're doing a sort of an excavation. And Carter caught the end of the argument, and he, in court, stood up for the security guards rather than the extremely wealthy French people. And he got sidelined for it because he wasn't, you know, he wasn't from a wealthy background himself. He wasn't, you know, he wasn't from the same kind of class or status, and he was siding with people who were, even lower class. And he got sidelined for a few years. And I think that's a really interesting thing about it. There's so much about Carter I find fascinating. I do think it would make a really good kind of biopic.
Maybe someone will take you up on that. You never know. Book of Shame. Well, you indicated that you had so many, so pick one.
I do. I mean, there's only so much time, isn't there, in the world? I've never read Proust.
Neither have I.
Hooray! I mean, I know all about the Madeleines.
Yeah.
It's the thing, isn't it? There's certain things that kind of seep into kind of you know, collective consciousness without you ever actually having read them. I mean, there's loads of stuff I haven't read. I think, you know, you can go into a library, and I'm lacking in some of the classics. I'm quite good on kind of the Greek stuff more because I've read, you know, the plays and, you know, more of that sort of stuff. But some of the real classics I've just passed me by a bit. I
mean, I get the feeling that you don't really mind too much that you haven't read Proust in a way. I mean, do you sort of feel a lack? I mean, is there something where you think, oh, I mean, what I always say is that I didn't read the Hilary Mantel Wolf Hall books, which was particularly bad because I was a literary editor at the time and she was winning all the prizes. And I could bluff about them, you know, if the editor asked me. Because, of course, you just send them out and somebody else reviews them and you go, what he said, you know, I agree with him. I do feel slightly bad because I love her books. I loved her other books.
I only read the first one and it's a fantastic book, but it's very rich. Like it feels like you're eating like the richest chocolate cake, you know, that Austrian chocolate cake that's so dense. It's like eating a black hole, you know. Yeah. It's like that. Like it's so rich, and the language is so rich in it that you kind of can only read a short bit at a time. Otherwise, you sort of get like your head gets indigestion. And it's exquisite. It's beautifully written. It's not absolutely not a criticism, but I think you have to be in the right mood to read it. And I think that's the thing. Sometimes you're not in the right mood to read something, and it kind of passes me by. But yeah, no, I Proust is the one that I'm like, I probably should read it at some stage.
Well, and finally, you know, I mean, with Proust, there's levels because some people go, but I read it in French, you know, so you almost can't keep up with it, really. I
will not be doing that. My schoolgirl French is not good enough. I mean, I can watch Monsieur Hulot's Holiday and translate it as I go along. That's my level of French.
Right. So finally, Liz, what bizarre or humorous feedback have you had on your work over the years? Any aspect of your work?
I particularly like with the gifts, actually. One of the I had quite a lot of people who I kill a dog quite early in it. It's not a spoiler. I kill a dog quite early in it, and the dog is killed deliberately and in quite a nasty fashion. And people got really upset that I'd killed a fictional dog. But it should upset you. It is a scene that is designed to upset you because you know, it's a nice dog and it's sort of done as an experiment to show something. But the surgeon already knows what it's going to show because he's done it before. So it is an act of cruelty, and it says something about him, and that's why it's important that I show it, that it's very cold and clinical. But yeah, I had lots of people about, like, you know, quite a few in America, actually. When it came out in America, I had quite a lot of Americans being very upset. They couldn't read on after I'd killed a fictional dog. It doesn't matter, the women in the book are getting treated really badly, but the dog, the fictional dog, really upset them. And it's like, it's not real. It's a fictional dog. I haven't killed a dog in the making of this book, you know. But that was, I wasn't expecting that. That was that's one that always makes me laugh, how upset people got. Like, you should be upset, but so upset that they were so upset about the dog that they couldn't read on. And I thought, okay, that's fine, don't read on then.
Something to note. I mean, you know, you haven't become a serial killer of small animals in your fiction, have you?
No.
I suppose it's.
I like dogs, you know, but that's the point.
Yeah, exactly.
It's really funny how it's like, there's the point, and it's missed. It's gone past. You've missed the point. But yeah, the very strange reaction I found.
Yes, I mean, you know, you hear so much stuff from authors about, you know, the 1-star review that says things like the packaging was torn.
Oh yeah.
You know, it was left on the doorstep and it should have been, you know, left somewhere else, all that kind of thing. 1 star.
Got this for my uncle and he didn't like it. And it's like, but I find it really odd when people haven't finished reading something and give it a nasty 1-star review. I think that's bizarre because I mean, there's lots of books that I read that I don't like, and there's lots of writers that I'm not a huge fan of, and I wouldn't go out there publicly and say it because it's not helpful, and it's also it's so subjective. So I just find that strange because I think it's more about that person wanting to make their little stamp on the world than it's actually about what they thought about the book. I really try not to look now. I've been quite good with the 12. I just haven't really looked at what people have sort of said about it. I hope people like it, but I also I think it's because it's my fourth one as well. I'm a bit more used to the process. That there's nothing I can do if they don't. Like, that's the book. I hope you like it, and if you don't, you know.
Yeah, there'll be another one along shortly.
I feel like Stuart Lee though, that it's like, well, you either like the sort of thing that I write or you don't, and that's fine. You know, we all like different things. It'd be very boring if we all like the same thing. But yeah, when people really hate it, it's like, please don't read any of my other books. I'd rather you just didn't read any of my other books, and that's fine. Like, you don't like what I do, and that's totally fine. But yeah, it's funny. And then people come back. This is the third one of hers that I've read where you're like, you didn't like the others. Why have you read this? I don't understand.
This is the third one I haven't enjoyed.
Yes, exactly. I find that really fun. That's the other thing, as well as the dog, the dead dog. The kind of, I've read all her books and I haven't liked any of them. It's like, other writers are available, many of them.
That's quite a good note to end on. Well, I like your books. We've been talking about the 12. And it just does everything I love in a book, really. Sort of mind expansion, deep time. I mean, so many themes as well. You know, we have an eco theme, but it's not cli-fi. I hate that term. Have you come across the new cli-fi term?
No, that's ugly.
Oh, no. I didn't even know what it meant. I mean, the first time I saw it, I was like, cliffy? Click, what is that? You know, but yes, it's not cli-fi. It's not sci-fi. It's its own beautiful thing. So thank you very much for joining me in the book bag, Liz Hyder, and lots of luck with the book and with the next thing that'll be completely different again, I'm sure.
Wildly different.
Wildly different. Fabulous. So bye-bye, Liz. We will bid you adieu. And bye, Liz. Thank you very much for joining me in the book bag. We've been talking about the 12. Other authors are available, but other books by Liz Hyder are available, and they're all extremely good. So thank you for joining me. See you next time. Adieu.